Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for February 10th of 2024. Taking a look at the risk for severe thunderstorms for today, we have a slight risk for much of central Texas with a marginal threat that kind of extends back into parts of northern Louisiana and into central western Mississippi there. Threats for today do include the main risk of a 15% hail risk with this hatched area, indicating that there may be the possibility of hail sizes that could reach 2 inches in diameter or greater. We are expected to see the possibility of hail that may reach 2 inches to potentially 2.5 inches across this region, and then we may be able to see some isolated large hail back into parts of northern Louisiana and into central Mississippi. Other risks for today do include a 5% damaging wind risk, where we may be able to see the possibility of some isolated damaging wind gusts, as well as a 2% tornado risk, indicating that we may have the possibility of a brief tornado or two that may be weak across this region. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for a lot of the southeast here along the Gulf Coast, with a slight risk that extends from eastern Texas into western Alabama. Threats for tomorrow do include a 5% tornado risk, a 15% wind risk, and a 15% hail risk. And then for our day 3 outlook, as of right now, we do have a slight risk for a good portion of Georgia into parts of Alabama, southern South Carolina, and the Florida Panhandle, where we may have to watch for the possibility of a few tornadoes, a tornado or two, as well as some damaging wind gusts and maybe some hail. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, for today we do have a slight risk that is going to extend back into eastern Tennessee all the way into eastern Texas here, where we could see the possibility of some scattered flash flooding and some very heavy rainfall, potentially long-lasting rainfall across this region. And I'll get into that, the reason for that on our surface analysis. For tomorrow, we do have a marginal threat for a lot of the Dixie states into parts of eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, and South Carolina. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a marginal threat that is extending back into southern Virginia, into parts of Georgia, where we could see the possibility of some isolated flash flooding. Taking a look at our winter weather outlooks and the possibility for heavy snow, for today we are looking at the possibility of quite a bit of heavy snowfall, potentially greater than 4 inches across a lot of the high plains extending from New Mexico into parts of western Nebraska. For tomorrow, we are expected to see the possibility of some heavy snowfall for parts of the Texas Panhandle there, where we may be able to see the possibility of snowfall totals that may reach more than 4 inches. And then for our day 3 outlook, we are expected to see the possibility of some heavy snowfall extending from Ohio into West Virginia and back into Massachusetts and Connecticut, including New York and Pennsylvania. Taking a look at our surface analysis, as of right now, we are seeing a rush of cold air out of the north associated with the high pressure system at the surface, and that is leading to a cold front which is extending back from the Ohio River Valley into the Texas Panhandle. Then we also do have a stationary front that is a little bit further down to the south here. I am going to spoil the configuration of the trough that we are going to be watching out for today, with a upper level low back into the Rockies and it advecting out of Mexico into the region of concern. If you look at the geometry of this trough, you can tell that we are definitely expected to see a little bit more of a QLCS-like setup along this cold front, and because of that QLCS-like QLCS-like setup along a somewhat stationary cold front, that is going to be leading to the possibility of just a train of rainfall for a lot of the slight risk region, which is why we are seeing the possibility for some scattered flash flooding, and that we are even seeing potentially severe thunderstorms firing off before the main event for today across a lot of Texas, and that is going to lead to some uncertainty, but I will get into more on that later. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars like we usually do, and the trough that we are expected to see we are expected to see a positively tilted trough with the upper level low that is going to be back across the southwestern United States in the Rockies there, and that is going to advect out of Mexico. The base of the trough is expected to be back into northern Mexico here, far west of the region of concern for today. However, we are going to see a little bit more of a 500 millibar jet streak, which should push into the region of concern, which should support the risk for severe thunderstorms. And then we should also see a surface low with a cold front attached to it, which is going to come out of the southwest. And that is going to be what's going to trigger our severe thunderstorms. Because of the positively tilted nature, we may see a little bit more limited directional shear from this. However, we should definitely see some directional shear regardless, which should definitely support the possibility of one or two brief tornadoes. However, the tornado risk is quite conditional despite what models are indicating for today. And again, you can see that the configuration of the trough with that cold front that we have extending back into Tennessee, leading to the potential for some scattered flash flooding. But overall, what we are currently seeing as far as 500 millibars, we are seeing 500 millibar flow into the region of concern, which is going to support the risk for severe thunderstorms upwards of 60 to 70 miles per hour. I want you to keep that number in mind at the mid-level, the center of the atmosphere, and then we will compare that to our upper levels and our low levels to get an idea of our our speed shear. Before I go any further, something I do want to mention really quickly is notice these special weather statements across a lot of central Texas. I'm not going to touch on these now, however, I do want you to keep that in mind because it will become important later. However, taking a look at our 700 millibars and our low-level jet, what we're currently seeing isn't really the best. We are seeing kind of a crappy low-level jet here with 700 millibar flow that is going to be around the 30 to 40 miles per hour, which overall, with the configuration of the trough and it being positively tilted and the lack of a strong low-level jet, it's not looking very good as far as directional shear. And our directional shear may even be a little bit more contaminated than what is actually going to be across this region. So do keep that in mind because we do have the mountains back towards the west here, and the mountains may interact with a lot of this air and may lead to a little bit more contamination in what we are seeing as far as directional shear in our storm relative felicity when we do look at that later. So do keep that in mind. But overall, our low-level jet isn't looking the best for directional shear, but our low-level jet values of 40 to 30 mile per hour, keep that in mind, already is looking quite vastly different from our 500 millibars. Taking a look at our 200 millibars in our upper levels, one thing I do want to mention is what we look for at our 200 millibars. We look for split flow here because if our isobars are spreading apart from each other, that will kind of create a void in the atmosphere in the upper levels, and because it is in the upper levels and the atmosphere is a gas and it will try to achieve equilibrium any way it can, it will take air from the mid levels and the low levels and it will rise upward to fill that gap in the upper levels. But because we don't really have that split flow right now, it is mostly zonal at our 200 millibars, so overall we aren't really seeing a ton of lift in our upper levels that will really help all that much. However, we are definitely seeing quite a bit of speed shear because we are seeing 200 millibar flow upwards of 150, 160, 140 knots. Compare that to our low levels in our 500 millibars. With low level flow at 30 to 40 miles per hour, and then 140 to 160 at 200 millibars. That is nearly a 100 knot increase between our low levels and our upper levels. So we are definitely expected to see a insane amount of directional shear, speed shear across this region, which will definitely lead to very elongated photographs. Taking a look at our bulk shear to get an idea of what our speed shear may look like across this region, we are looking at the possibility of very, very large amounts of speed shear, potentially upwards of 90 to 80 knots of speed shear. As mentioned previously, it is very close to around a 100 knot to 100 mile per hour increase from our surface level to our mid-level surface to our upper level in the strength of our winds. So we are definitely expected to see a very large amount of speed shear across this region. So a potential for large to potentially significant hail across this region is definitely not out of the question. However, it is going to get very complicated and very confusing and potentially very complex as we move into our tornado forecasting, as our tornado forecasting is probably one of the most confusing things for today. Taking a look at our directional shear and our storm relative felicity, while we're still on the topic of our upper air maps and our shear, again, I'm not really too sure about the overall consistency and how certain all of this down here is going to be, because we do have the mountains. I'm not sure if it is being contaminated or if that is actually what's going to happen in reality. So if someone can please clarify that for me in the comments, it will definitely help a ton. However, again, I'm not really too sure if this is contamination or if it is what the actual environment is going to look like coming off the mountains. But what is certain is the fact that we are expected to have at least some directional shear across this region. Even if we do have definitely some quite strong directional shear, as if what the models are indicating, if it isn't contamination and is what is actually going to look like in the environment, this should definitely support the possibility of at least 1 or 2 brief tornadoes across this region. Again, the possibility for some, but again, the potential for tornadoes in forecasting that for today is definitely quite complicated, so definitely take everything that I'm going to tell you with a grain of salt. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity so we can get an idea of when and where we should be able to see our storms and the general timing for them, as well as general radar analysis of what we are expected to see as far as the storm structure and whatnot for a lot of these storms that we may have across this region. Let's start off with what we're currently seeing as of right now. Notice that we are seeing quite a bit of rain showers and quite a bit of thunderstorms, some of which did have severe thunderstorm warnings on them previously and are still ongoing. And all of the rain showers that we are seeing extending back up into eastern Texas and into western Tennessee. This is going to provide a little bit of confusion as far as the possibility for storms across this region, because this is kind of a little bit more of a boom and bust situation, or sorry, boom or bust situation, because it could either potentially be a significant risk for severe thunderstorms, or it could just not happen at all. We do have the possibility of this risk for severe thunderstorms not even materializing because of some of these rain showers and what we are currently seeing, because one big concern is if the atmosphere will be able to fully recover behind all of these storms and rain showers that are currently ongoing. But a lot of models have been indicating that we should see our storms at least develop, and a lot of our composite reflectivity is indicating that we are expected to see some large hail with a lot of these storms. As you can see, a lot of our hail cores on some of our storms indicating upwards of 60 to 70 dBz, which does indicate very large hail. So again, we do have the possibility for large hail across this region if our storms do decide to develop and if our atmosphere can recover behind a lot of the rain showers and storms that we are currently seeing. But as far as the timing, we are expected to see a lot of our rain showers and severe thunderstorms and thunderstorms that we are seeing currently ongoing. Those should clear out around 9 p.m. And we should see our storms develop in a quite scattered, potentially more isolated, but mostly scattered like fashion across this region. Around 1 a.m. So we are definitely expected to see these storms develop quite late at night, and they should move towards the Dallas region potentially around the very early morning of tomorrow. So we could see the risk for these storms and the potential for large hail continue into the very early morning of tomorrow. Taking a look at the environment that our storms are expected to be in, excluding our upper air, because we already took a look at this. Let's take a look at our dew points and our temperatures and what we may see as far as instability. So as far as our dew points, we are expected to see some fairly decent dew points, which would definitely lead to quite a bit of instability across this region, or at least support instability, with dew points around the upper 50s to potentially the low 60s, which overall are fairly decent. And then taking a look at our temperatures across this region, our temperatures are a little bit more confusing. during the day, before our storms develop, we are expected to see temperatures that are going to be around the 70s or potentially get up to the 70s. However, again, our storms are expected to develop around 1 a.m. tonight, around midnight. We are expected to see much cooler temperatures at night, around the 50s to potentially the 60s, which may lead to overall a decreased amount of instability, but should support at least some instability nonetheless. But the major concerning fact is the fact that these storms are expected to occur so late at night, but our cold front is definitely pretty prominent here. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how it may affect our instability, and because we are on pivotal weather, we are going to be able to take a look at some of the observed soundings, or sorry, simulated soundings across this region. Not observed because these are being simulated by models. But our lapse rates are definitely fairly decent. We do have some presence of lapse rates around the 8s, the upper 8s, to potentially even into the 9s across this region, which is definitely really decent and should definitely help with instability across this region quite a bit. So we should definitely see quite a bit of aid from instability. And it may even help with the risk for hail because it does make it a little bit cooler the higher up you go. And then we can also take a look at some of our observed or surface soundings, trying to find some that may represent the environment a little bit better, as well as some of the more concerning soundings that we have seen across this region. Across the region, I think this is going to be around a little bit more of an average sounding for the entire environment. We are seeing the possibility of the potential for some, at least one or two brief tornadoes that may be weak across this region. And then we also do have quite a bit of instability with most of the stable cape around the 1,000s, 1,500, and they may even get up to the 2,000s, but we may be struggling on our surface instability because our inflow layer and our parcel trace is starting above the surface somewhat. Some storms may be able to tap into that surface layer. However, they are looking at being a little bit more elevated because our surface instability may be struggling a little bit. And one major concern is that some of these soundings were saying PDS tornado. However, the parcel trace was starting above the surface layer, indicating that storms were going to be a little bit more elevated with that PDS tornado sounding. So I'm not sure how well that will verify, especially because the parcel trace was elevated. So again, we may have the potential for a little bit more elevated storms, which may lead to an overall decreased risk for tornado, which is going to bring it down to that 2% that we are expected to see across this region. I don't really think we are expected to see all that much of a risk for the PDS tornado, but it is becoming quite concerning with some of the soundings. And then you can see our shear is a little bit more on the limited end, but we definitely do have a very elongated photograph indicating the potential for some significant hail. Taking a look at some of the more concerning soundings that I was talking about, first thing I want you to notice is that it does say PDS tornado. However, we are a little bit more limited on shear. We do have the veering of the winds in the low levels, indicating that we should see at least the potential for tornadoes. However, I'm not too sure what is giving this the PDS tornado indicator, because our energy helicity indexes are a little bit more on the lower end, around that 2%, 5% tornado risk area, but we are seeing a quite concerning storm or significant tornado parameter with convective inhibition graphs here. It is quite concerning down here, but the major thing I want you to notice is the fact that our parcel trace is starting above the surface layer. So our surface instability may be struggling a little bit, and our storms may potentially be more elevated. So again, I'm not really sure what's giving this the PDS tornado indicator, but some of these soundings are quite concerning. Taking a look at our convective inhibition, we are expected to see quite a bit of convective inhibition across this region right before storms are expected to develop, with negative values that are going to be around 100 to negative 200. which should definitely prevent warm air from rising right before storms are expected to develop. And if this cap can break, which overall I'm not really sure if it can, because again we do have the storms that are currently ongoing and have happened earlier today, which may prevent the atmosphere from fully recovering across this region. So with that in mind, and the fact that the cap is fairly strong, it is quite concerning on if storms can actually break through that cap. If they can, they may potentially be a little bit more explosive, and it may aid with storm development if it can break through that cap. However, again, I'm not too certain if they really are going to be able to break through that cap. So we will have to watch for the possibility of storms not even developing underneath this cap because of the conditionality of the environment that we are currently looking at. Taking a look at our most unstable cape, and then we'll go into our surface instability and our 0 to 3 kilometer cape. Finally tying everything that we've looked at so far with our environment, excluding our upper air maps. We are seeing fairly decent instability across this region. Definitely fairly decent, upwards of around the 1000s, and potentially even getting up to the 2000s across some of Texas, which again should definitely be able to fuel the potential for severe thunderstorms. However, keep in mind we haven't looked at surface instability, but surface instability doesn't need to be present outside of most unstable cape do support the possibility of large to potentially significant hail. So even if we don't have the presence of strong surface instability, we are still expected to see the possibility of some large to potentially significant hail if storms even develop. Taking a look at our surface instability, you can see that a lot of our our most unstable cape is translating down to our surface level, and we are definitely seeing quite a bit of decent surface instability across this region. And couple that together with the amount of directional shear that we may have, again, we should definitely see the possibility for at least the potential of 1 or 2 brief tornadoes across this region. But again, the risk is so conditional that the risk shouldn't really increase from a 2% tornado risk, regardless of what our energy helicity index values look like. And a lot of our simulated soundings, again, we're starting the partial trace above the surface layer, indicating that storms may be a little bit more elevated, which again still can produce the potential for large and significant hail, but can't really produce the potential for tornadoes because the inflow is starting above the surface. So again, if a lot of our simulated soundings are starting our partial trace above the surface, despite there being decent and ample surface instability, I'm not really sure why it's starting the partial trace above the surface layer. So if anyone does have an answer for me, please tell me in the comments, because I am quite confused on that. Because again, if we do have surface instability, our partial trace should be extending down to the surface layer. But overall, we are seeing some fairly decent surface instability, and if our partial trace is going to extend down to the surface layer, some of our more southern storms may be able to see the possibility of at least 1 or 2 brief tornadoes. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability, the reason I do take a look at this because with certain cold core events, we mainly look for 0 to 3 kilometer instability if we don't have strong most unstable cape with cold core like setups. But this isn't a cold core like setup in any way, but it is just a good indicator or a good aiding factor that we can look at, and we are definitely seeing some fairly decent 0 to 3 kilometer instability here, upwards of around 110 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer instability, which should definitely help with storms quite a bit. Finally, culminating all of this together so we can take a look at our energy helicity index values across this region. We are seeing some fairly decent energy helicity index values, again, because we are seeing quite a bit of very decent directional shear, much stronger directional shear coming off the mountains, if you remember, in this region, plus the stronger instability, most unstable, and surface instability across this region with regards of the fact that storms may not even develop, and the partial trace starting above the surface layer. is indicating that we should at least have the possibility of 1 or 2 brief tornadoes across this region. Overall, I don't think that energy helicity index is supposed to look like this in reality. Definitely not going to be indicative of what the tornado risk is actually going to look like because of how conditional our risk for tornadoes is. And again, all the different factors at play do indicate that we should see a different energy helicity index value in reality that should be lower than this. So 6 energy helicity index isn't indicative of our tornado risk whatsoever. Main reason for that is because it doesn't really take into account really anything else outside of directional shear and instability, which can be a good indicator of the overlap in the overall risk for tornadoes, but right now this isn't indicative of the risk for tornadoes. Taking a look at our wind gust model so we can get an overall idea of what the potential for damaging wind gusts may look like for today across this region. With a lot of the storms that we are expected to see, especially towards western Texas when storms originally initiate, we are expected to see, again, the potential for isolated damaging wind gusts upwards of 50 miles per hour across this region with these clusters of storms. That is expected to decrease as those storms do move towards central Texas and into eastern Texas, but we should still see the possibility of some isolated damaging wind gusts that may reach 40 to 50 miles per hour as those move into central Texas. But overall, the main risk for damaging wind gusts should definitely be back towards western Texas. Before I end the video, I do want to talk about the GoFundMe for Project Gladiator real quick. This is the GoFundMe that is supposed to fund Project Gladiator, and the main thing with Project Gladiator is to turn a Jeep Gladiator into an insanely powerful storm-chasing beast that will be able to collect data from some of the most powerful tornadoes and will lead to meteorological breakthroughs. So if you do want to help with the cause, or you want to read more information on the GoFundMe, the link is in the description. Your support really helps a lot. I do want to thank the people that have already donated so far, which is mainly my sister, and my Aunt Dawn. And I am rewriting the information for the GoFundMe, so it is a little bit better and a little bit more professional. So if you do want to help the cause, please donate. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being and take this forecast with a little bit more of a grain of salt than other forecasts because, again, we do have that insane amount of conditionality with the risk for severe thunderstorms for today. But if you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast, or you would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. I do read them. 2 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather and Weather Watcher. The links to their channels will be in the description. Weather Watcher does do forecast videos for Europe if you are interested in those, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.